Ron, I want to bring up an issue since we're talking about Janet Yellen. Gary Cohn has been talked about potentially as the next Federal Reserve chief. Even President Trump, in an interview he did a short time ago with the Wall Street Journal, Cohn was in the room, and Trump said, hey, he could be the next Fed chief. But Gary Cohn has given an interview to the Financial Times, and he has said that the Trump administration must do better in condemning neo-Nazis and white supremacists following the violent protests in Charlottesville. He told the FT he faced enormous pressure to quit after the uproar over Trump's reaction to the clashes in Charlottesville. The administration can and must do better in consistently and unequivocally condemning these groups and do everything we can to heal the deep divisions that exist in our communities. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, I think Gary Cohn was probably the top pick before that. The issue really, I think, for Trump is if Trump can find a Trump loyalist that he can trust, he'll put that person into place. But the issue is if there's no Trump loyalist out there, what Trump has shown time and again is he's just going to try to find the person that will perform the best. And arguably, there is a case to be made for Yellen just because of how well the stock markets have done. But then again, Trump's also been extremely critical of her policies. And so you'd think that he would replace her with somebody like a Cohn, or maybe someone that's frankly unknown or that's currently on Wall Street right now. There's a lot of speculation flying around as to who that could be. And so it's hard to tell at this point.
Gary Kaltbaum, here's another quote from this article, and we're highlighting it because this is new news. As a patriotic American, I am reluctant to leave my post because I feel a duty to fulfill my commitment to work on behalf of the American people, but I also feel compelled to voice my distress over the events of the last 2 weeks, said Gary Cohn. It's a little bit of a different response than you heard from Steve Mnuchin.
The fact that he's out there in public saying that, no, you now know that this is some serious stuff. And I gather he's had some long talks with President Trump on something like this. It's good news that he is staying because we do need some stability at the White House in a place where people have been leaving in droves or getting fired in droves. And let's hope this is the start of something better. I did want to ask Ron about one thing about Draghi. In Europe, they're still printing almost $1 trillion a year. They have negative interest rates, so in other words, you deposit money and you got to give them the toaster. Is there any talk whatsoever about them rolling that back in any way, shape, or form? And I do know Japan's doing the same. I just wonder and worry what's at the end of the road of all this, not just easy money, but over-the-top easy money.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that they would have to, but it doesn't look like, I mean, things are just so up in the air over there, except for in a couple different markets. I mean, you know, frankly, I think they're still railing back from Brexit and seeing what's next politically. I think there's a little bit more stability politically over there now, but you have to wonder, can the printing keep going? And frankly, if it does, what are the consequences, right? And so while in the short term it might be great for them to say, okay, we're going to continue this easing, but the question becomes, what's the long-term consequence? I think in the United States, at least we've done some moderate pullbacks. You're right, in Japan and in Europe, they just keep it going. And you have to, the question will become, if a bubble pops in Europe, will it have an impact in the United States? Will it have an impact worldwide? And will it also bring our chickens home to roost for all the printing that we had done after our recession? And so it's really going to be a case study, and hopefully not a disastrous one, on monetary policy. And for the markets, there's got to be a lot of questions and uncertainty. And so in the short term, certainly the people want to see stability, but at some point you have to wonder, okay, how are we going to step back from this easing?
Heather, I want to get it back to Gary Cohn and this interview that he did with the Financial Times as I go through it, as I'm reading it. Here's another quote from it. Citizens standing up for equality and freedom can never be equated with white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and the KKK. As a Jewish American, I will not allow neo-Nazis ranting, "Jews will not replace us," to cause this Jew to leave his job. I feel deep empathy for all those who have been targeted by these hate groups. We must all unite together against them. I think that this is evidence of, here's an individual, you can call it personal politics, whatever you want to call it, but he felt compelled to speak out. He chose a paper that's not based here in the U.S. to do that, which is a bit odd. But he's talking to the press, and it keeps the story alive. President Trump brought it up again in Phoenix, in the Phoenix rally, but this is a story that will not go away. And at some point, do you think we're going to need some sort of national healing led by the president on that note?
We do need national healing led by the president, but in his defense, he has come out and he's condoned these acts of violence and hatred.
Condemned.
Condemned, yeah, condemned. Oh, very sorry. He has condemned these acts of violence, and he has said this is not okay. What more does the media want for him, or Gary Cohn? What is he looking for? What kind of statement? Because in my eyes, he has been very matter-of-fact, saying 100%, I do not support this, and this is not okay.
And it isn't, and Ron, I'm going to end on this, but this is an issue with, unless you speak the language and use the language of the left to condemn these Nazis and white supremacists in the way that they see fit, they will shame you until you do, and they try to shame individuals into quitting their jobs. And that's some of what you get from this Gary Cohn interview. He said, I'm not going to quit my job. I'm not going to let these violent Nazis and white supremacists force me into not serving my country. And I think that that's an interesting way of approaching this.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And so in some respects, you'd say that Gary Cohn might be trumpeting what the media has been saying about Donald Trump. But I really think he's basically where most Americans are. But I also think that people will really respect that he's not quitting on the president, he's not quitting on the country. And so in some respects, he's pushing against it. And so, you know, he's a very fair-minded person. I think that's why some people would say, listen, maybe you need someone who will question the president in a position of power like being Fed chairman, someone who can be a little bit independent. And maybe that's exactly why he did it in the Financial Times, and maybe that's exactly why he's saying what he's saying, to show his independence. So it'll be interesting to see in the months ahead.
Ron, I really quickly, I'm just while I'm sitting here, the reason I'm looking at my phone is because President Trump is tweeting, and he tweeted, if Senate Republicans don't get rid of the filibuster rule and go to a 51% majority, few bills will be passed. 8 Dems control the Senate. Do you think that will happen? This is one thing that the president keeps hammering individuals on really quickly. Do you think that will happen, this filibuster rule disappears?
I think it all has to do with tax reform, right? If they can get tax reform done, then I think a lot of this pressure to get rid of the filibuster goes away. If they fail on tax reform after failing on Obamacare, then, man, there is going to be a lot of popular pressure to say, listen, something has to be done. We have to change how this is. You can't have to have a supermajority to do basic promises that you ran on and promised to the American people. It's absolutely absurd that basically all of Trump's promises are going to be derailed because of this filibuster. But if they can get this one thing done, I think a lot of that pressure goes away. Tax reform is going to be what basically the future of the filibuster is put on.
Ron, thank you so much. Ron Meyer,
Thanks,
take care.